Rita and Daniel had been married for barely a month when they found out the exciting news. They were expecting their first child. The joy in their home was palpable. They were swept up in the thrill of beginning the family together so soon. Family members gathered at their home with bright smiles. Friends threw congratulations their way, and everyone anticipated the arrival of the new family member. Their dreams were finally becoming reality. But only a few months into the pregnancy, the unthinkable happened. Rita laid coiled up on the bed, her face pale as she looked towards the window, unable to look at Daniel, who sat beside her, his hand gently stroking her hair. She could feel the raw pain, the emptiness where life had once been growing inside her. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Why us, Daniel?" she whispered, choking back tears. "Why did this have to happen?" Daniel's own voice was low, almost breaking as he replied, "I don't know, Rita, but we'll get through this together, I promise." But promises didn't ease the ache in her heart, and when she got pregnant again, the shadow of her first loss loomed over them, making every moment fragile and every little ache alarming. Daniel was vigilant, refusing to let her lift a finger. He insisted on cooking, cleaning, and driving her to work, anything to protect the precious life growing inside her. They tried everything, even reducing every possible source of stress. But 3 months in, it happened again. As they sat together in the doctor's office, the words blurred together: miscarriage, unknown cause, so sorry. It felt like the walls were closing in, leaving them trapped in sorrow and confusion. Over the next few years, despite their hope, they faced the same heartbreak again, and again. Rita barely left their bedroom, the grief too heavy to bear. She laid in bed, feeling hollow, as if the very essence of her being had been taken away from her. Daniel, though equally devastated, masked his own pain as best as he could. He would bring her tea, sit beside her, and hold her hand, his voice always soft and full of reassurance. One evening, as he sat beside her in the dim room, he whispered, "Rita, I know this hurts, but we'll keep trying. And if it's not in God's plan, then we'll find another way, maybe adoption." She shook her head slowly, her voice breaking. "I don't want to give up yet, Daniel. I just feel it in my heart that I'm meant to have our child." Her eyes met his, pleading, "Let's try again." Daniel sighed, his face filled with a quiet determination. "Then we will, and this time we'll do everything possible to make sure you're safe, healthy, and happy." Months passed, and the cautious hope in their lives became tangible once more. Rita was pregnant again, and they both approached each day with reverence, as if their entire world was balanced on a delicate thread. Daniel's protectiveness grew tenfold. He meticulously planned her diet, scheduled rest time, and made sure she was surrounded by positivity. She even took time away from work till the baby came. On a warm Saturday afternoon, Daniel caught Rita staring at the tiny clothes she had bought during her first pregnancy. She held a little blue romper, her fingers tracing the soft fabric. Maybe this time I'll get to use it," she murmured, her eyes bright with hope, yet shadowed by lingering doubt. Daniel wrapped his arms around her from behind, his voice warm against her ear. "Yes, you will, Rita. I know it. This time will be different." But 2 months later, the heartbreaking pattern repeated itself again. Evening, clutching her stomach, her face twisted in pain, his heart sank as he rushed her to the hospital. But the news was the same: another miscarriage. As they drove home in silence, Rita stared out of the window, her eyes vacant. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible. Maybe I'm broken." Daniel's grip on the wheel tightened. "Don't ever say that, Rita. This isn't your fault. We'll get through this somehow." But after 3 more miscarriages in the span of 3 years, the weight of their sorrow began to feel unbearable. Every loss chipped away at their hope, leaving them in a state of perpetual mourning. Friends and family had stopped mentioning children altogether, their pitying glances a constant reminder of the dream slipping further away. Desperate and on the verge of breaking down, Rita decided to seek help from Pastor Harry, the minister who had blessed their union. The pastor had been a respected figure in the community, his sermons filled with wisdom and strength. Perhaps, Rita thought, he would have some insights, a prayer, a blessing that could heal her wounded spirit. Sitting across from him in the modest office, she poured out her heart, her voice wavering. Pastor, I don't know what to do anymore. We have tried everything. It's as if it's as if I'm being punished. Pastor Harry nodded sympathetically, reaching across the desk to place a hand over hers. Rita, sometimes God tests those he loves most, but I believe there's a way to break this circle. However, he hesitated. His eyes studying her intently. It will require a certain sacrifice. Rita looked up, her brow furrowing in confusion. What kind of sacrifice? Pastor Harry leaned closer, lowering his voice. It may sound unusual, but God has spoken to me. He said that to bear a child, you must unite with someone else in spirit and body, someone who has been touched by his call in the past, watching her reaction closely, with me. Rita recoiled, shock and confusion contorting her face. Pastor, I don't understand. Are you saying I need to? Will you? Pastor Harry held her gaze, nodding solemnly. This is a revelation, Rita. God has shown me that by connecting with me in this way, you will finally conceive. Rita's mind spun, but her heart ached with longing. Desperation gnawed at her, clouding her judgment. Against every instinct, she agreed, grasping onto the hope that the busier sacrifice would bring her a child. A week later, she discovered she was pregnant again. The joy was immediate, but so was the fear. She shared the news with Pastor Harry, and he gravely insisted that for the pregnancy to be successful, they had to continue meeting in secret. The child's life depends on it, he claimed. Months passed, and this time the pregnancy went full term. Rita gave birth to a beautiful baby boy, whom she named Daniel Jr. But once her son was in her arms, she knew she couldn't continue her relationship with Pastor Harry. She ended things, determined to focus on her family. Pastor Harry, however, was furious. He called and texted relentlessly, even showing up at her home unannounced, demanding that she should continue their holy union. Rita ignored him, blocking his number and refusing to answer the door when he visited. She had her son, her family, and she intended to protect them at all costs. Months after, Daniel lost his job. Life had taken a brutal turn. He was working long hours as a laborer in a construction site, a job that paid a fraction of what he used to make, but kept food on the table barely. The burden weighed heavily on him, and every day he could see the toll it took on Rita. She would smile and reassure him, but he saw the sadness in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. Bills piled up, debt grew, and the constant worry over money put a strain on their relationship. One evening, as Daniel walked back home from work, exhausted and drenched in sweat, he ran into Mr. Okeke, their landlord, waiting on their doorstep with an irritated expression. Daniel, Mr. Okeke's voice was sharp, his growl growing deeper with every step Daniel took towards him. I am tired of your promises. You've been owing me rent for 6 months now. Do you think I run a charity here? Daniel stopped, trying to steady his breathing, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Mr. Okeke, please. I just need a bit more time. Things have been hard, but I swear I'm working. I'll get you the money. Mr. Okeke scoffed, his voice dripping with disdain. Working, huh? Look at you. You're a shadow of the man you used to be. I heard you were some big shot once. Now you're just a man who can't even keep a roof over his family head. Daniel clenched his fist, swallowing his pride as he tried to maintain his composure. I understand, Mr. Okeke. Just give me a little more time, please. Mr. Okeke sneered. 1 month, Daniel. That's all I give you. If you don't pay up by then, I will have no choice but to throw you and your family out on the streets. With that, the landlord turned and stomped away, leaving Daniel standing there, his head hung low, the weight of his shame nearly unbearable. As he opened the door and stepped inside, Rita was there. Her face softened when she saw him. She reached out, her fingers brushing his face. I heard everything, she whispered, her voice full of compassion. It's going to be okay, Daniel. We'll find a way. He looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. Rita, you deserve better. I can't stand seeing you and Daniel Jr. suffering because of me. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close. You're not failing us, Daniel. You're doing everything you can, and that's more than enough. But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of hopelessness that had settled within him. That night he laid awake, staring at the ceiling as he listened to the quiet sounds of his son breathing softly in the next room. Rita was right beside him, her hands resting gently on his chest. I love a silent reminder of everything they had endured together. A few days after the confrontation with Mr. Okeke, Daniel returned home one evening, covered in dust and grime. As he walked up the narrow streets towards their modest apartment, he noticed a crowd gathered in front of a kiosk, murmuring and pointing. In the middle of the gathering, he spotted Rita standing awkwardly. With her hands clenched together, her head lowered. A tall woman with a scowl on her face stood beside her, one hand on her hip and the other waving at Rita. In accusation, it was Iyabolu, the fish seller from down the street. Daniel quickened the pace, his heart pounding as he realized what was happening. I have been waiting for my money, Rita. Iyabolu's voice was loud and piercing, echoing down the street. It's been 3 weeks and you keep saying you will pay me tomorrow. Well, today is tomorrow. Rita's face flushed as she glanced around, clearly humiliated by the scene. Iyabolu, please, she said softly, her voice pleading. I promise I will pay you by the end of the week. Just give me a few more days. A few more days? I have heard that before. How am I supposed to trust you, Rita? Iyabolu snapped, crossing her arms. Do you think I catch fish for free? I got my children to feed. Daniel stepped forward, the anger rising in his chest. That's enough, Iyabolu, he said, his voice firm but shaking. How much does she owe you? Iyabolu looked at him, her eyes narrowing. 2,000 naira, and don't think I'll wait any longer. If you don't pay me now, I will tell everyone in this neighborhood that you people are good for nothing. Daniel reached into his pocket, his hand trembling as he counted out all the money he had earned that day. He didn't even have enough, only 1,500. He extended his hand, offering what he had. This is all I have right now. But I will get you the rest, he said, swallowing his pride. Forcing himself to look Iyabolu in the eyes, she snatched the money from his hand, muttering under her breath as she stuffed the money into her pocket. Better have the rest by tomorrow, she hissed before turning and storming away, leaving them standing there in front of the crowd that had gathered. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Daniel felt his chest tighten, his face hot with shame and anger. Rita looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. I'm so sorry, Daniel, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for this to happen. I just wanted to buy some fish and make dinner special for you and Daniel Jr. I didn't think. Daniel pulled her close, his hand resting on the back of her head as she buried her face into his chest, tears soaking into his shirt. It's not your fault, Rita. None of this is your fault. But deep down, the scene had shattered him. He could feel his heart breaking, the last shred of his pride crumbling into dust. Standing there with his wife, humiliated in front of their neighbors, over a mere 2,000 naira, he realized he couldn't bear to watch her suffer anymore. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. Iyabolu's harsh words echoed in his ears. The disappointment in Rita's eyes burned into his memory. He had tried everything, had given everything, but it wasn't enough. He would do anything to make sure Rita and Daniel Jr. never had to endure such humiliation again. The next morning, as he sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the bills and letters from debt collectors, an idea came to him, one that was desperate, reckless, and dangerous. He remembered the conversation he overheard on the construction site about life insurance policy. If something were to happen to him, Rita and Daniel Jr. would be taken care of. The thought lodged itself in his mind. He would need to fake his debt convincingly to make sure Rita received the payout. He would need someone he could trust to help him pull it off. He devised a plan to fake his own debts. He enlisted the help of his friend, Dr. Ahmad, who reluctantly agreed to help him pull it off. They planned it meticulously. On the designated day, Daniel was rushed to the hospital, where Dr. Ahmad pronounced him dead after a short illness. Rita was devastated, her sobs echoing down the hospital corridor. As she clung to Daniel's supposedly lifeless body, the news spread quickly, reaching Pastor Harry, who saw it as an opportunity to finally claim Rita as his own. Pastor Harry stood in the hospital room, watching as Rita sobbed quietly beside Daniel's lifeless body. His face twisted into a smile, a cruel satisfaction spreading across his features. For years, he kept her under his control, feeding her lies, manipulating her grief, and claiming divine revelations to keep her in his grasp. But now, with Daniel gone, he finally had the chance to make Rita ease. The room was silent, the faint beeping of hospital monitors filling the empty spaces. Between Rita's sobs, Pastor Harry took a step closer to her, resting a hand on her shoulder in what he hoped was a comforting gesture. Rita, I said softly, almost a whisper. Leaning close, I know this is hard. But you're not alone. You and Daniel Jr., you have me. Rita sniffled, looking up at him, confusion mingling with her grief. Pastor, I don't know what to do, she whispered, her voice shaking. Daniel, he's gone. I feel so lost. Harry seized the opportunity, crouching down beside her and lowering his voice. Rita, I've always been here for you, haven't I? Through every pain, every loss, I've been here to help you through it all. But I want to continue being there for you and Daniel Jr. Rita looked away, uncertain and overwhelmed. Pastor Harry continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratory tone. You know, I did everything for you, even the sacrifices I made for you to have Daniel Jr. He glanced around to make sure they were alone, then continued. That child is here because of me, because of our time together. We can be a family now, Rita. I know you loved Daniel, but he's gone. You have me now. We can raise Daniel Jr. together. Suddenly, a sharp gap sounded behind them. Rita froze, her eyes wild as she turned towards Daniel's body. Laying still on the hospital bed, the color drained from Pastor Harry's face as he watched Daniel stare, then sit up, blinking in disbelief at the sight before him. Interesting, he said, his tone icy. So you were blessing my wife. Pastor Harry's face went ashen. Daniel, you are alive? Rita's mouth fell open in shock. But before she could speak, Daniel broke the silence. Pastor Harry, he said, his voice low and laced with anger. You and my wife? Harry's face turned an unnatural shade of pale, his eyes darting around, searching for an escape. Daniel, you're alive, he stammered, taking a shaky step back. Oh, I'm very much alive, Pastor, Daniel growled. His gaze sharp as steel, he took Rita's hand, his voice softening as he looked into her eyes. I heard everything, Rita. Every twisted lie I told you, every manipulative word. I know the truth now. Rita gasped, her face a mixture of horror and shame as she looked between Daniel and Pastor Harry. Tears pooled in her eyes, and she clung to Daniel, seeking his reassurance. I thought she stammered, but Daniel wrapped his arms around her, steadying her. It's okay, Rita, he whispered, brushing a tear from her cheek. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I won't leave you or Daniel Jr. He glared at Pastor Harry, who was now backing towards the door, eyes wide with fear. Daniel straightened, his voice booming with authority. And you, Pastor Harry, you used our pain, manipulated Rita, and lied about God's will, all for your own selfish desires. I trusted you. We all trusted you. And this is how you repay us? Pastor Harry tried to stammer out a defense, his words tripping over each other. Daniel, please, you don't understand. I was only doing what I thought was best. Best? Daniel laughed bitterly. You told my wife she needed to sleep with you to have our child. You took advantage of her desperation. There's nothing best about that. A few nurses peeked into the room, drawn by the raised voices. Pastor Harry's face burned with shame as he felt the weight of their disapproving stares. Realizing he had nowhere to hide, he dropped his head. His hands trembling, I only wanted to help, he murmured. His voice barely audible. Daniel scoffed. You helped yourself, and that you did well. As Pastor Harry tried to slip out of the room, Daniel stopped him with one final blow. You might as well leave. There's no place for deceit like yours in our lives. And you should know, Daniel added, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Daniel Jr. is my son. A real man doesn't need manipulation to have a family. Pastor Harry's face contorted, his voice open in shock and disbelief. But before he could say another word, Daniel shut the door in his face, his hand resting protectively on Rita's shoulder. In the days that followed, Daniel took Daniel Jr. for a DNA test. When the result came back, they confirmed what he had secretly hoped. Daniel Jr. was his biological son. Pastor Harry had lied, capitalizing on their darkest moments to fulfill his twisted desires. As they exposed the pastor's actions, the community rallied behind Rita and Daniel. Pastor Harry was disgraced, losing his position and leaving town with shame. Through the hardships, betrayal, and grief, Daniel and Rita emerged stronger, holding each other tighter, knowing that together they could face anything. One day, as Rita and Daniel sat together in their living room, a call came through. Daniel's company that had been falling apart had gotten a new owner, and they wanted Daniel to come back. As they looked down at their son, they knew their family love was genuine, one that had been trialed, tested, and had triumphed in the end. If you were Daniel, would you take Rita back?